My husband ruined my home and sanity with his beehive obsession, so I sent him packing. Now, a year later, he's trying to convince me to fund his new hobby, but I told him to buzz off. I went on vacation for 3 weeks with some friends and left my husband at home because he didn't want to go and had to watch our dog. I came home yesterday and found out that he bought some honeycombs from our friend's father. He has been sitting in the living room just eating the honeycomb, like the whole thing with all the beeswax and bits in it. I told him it wasn't healthy, but he said the wax is edible and he's eaten 6 of them. So, about 3 weeks ago, I flew to South Korea for a vacation with friends there. I trusted him because he's a 40-year-old adult man, and I assumed he'd be able to feed himself like a sane person despite possessing the cooking ability of a cactus. I was wrong. I should have dragged him and the dog to another country. What my husband decided to do during his 3 weeks without me was absurd. I would have been happier if he cheated on me instead. He ordered nothing but Taco Bell through DoorDash after he somehow broke my stove by cooking an entire 15-pound bag of red lentils all at once. Then he didn't bother to get a bowl for his lentils. He just ate them straight from the pot, stuffed the pot into the fridge, and broke one of the shelves inside it. Now, realizing he has eaten nothing but beeswax and honey for the last few days because he's some weird alien in a human disguise. Honeycombs give you gas, and Taco Bell gives you gas, so now it's today, and I'm awoken by what sounds like someone revving a motorcycle in my bedroom, followed by the stench of the fiery pits of hell itself. It's 5:30 in the morning. He gets up and uses the toilet as I'm opening the windows in a poor attempt to ventilate the house, but it's too late. He doesn't even have a solid poop, it's just 10 minutes of gas, like 20 seconds of non-stop farts followed by a huge gasp of air and then another 20 seconds of gas. By this time, the dog had hidden under my couch because it didn't know what those. It's 62 degrees out and windy. The wind just blows the fart smell around the house. My husband has left the bathroom and has walked upstairs. It sounds like there's a small 2-stroke engine in his pants. I can't take it anymore, so I scream that I will get breakfast at the diner and leave him. I bring the dog with me because the dog followed me out. After all, it also doesn't want to be here right now. Update. It's 9 o'clock and my husband texted me to tell me to rent a carpet cleaner from Dollar General because he trusted a fart and shat all over the living room floor. It's going to be one of those days. Update 1. It's 10:23 and I returned home after a lovely day of walking my dog around the park, getting coffee, renting a carpet cleaner. I took so long scurrying around that my husband had time to harass our neighbors and borrow a spot-bought carpet cleaner that didn't clean our carpet. I gave him the instructions for a carpet cleaner I rented for a stupid amount of money from Dollar General, and I'm now locked in our bedroom. He's allowed in when the house is fixed, and he's no longer filled with more gas than the Hindenburg. Update 2. If I don't survive, 11:40. I can't hear the carpet cleaner anymore, but I can still hear the horns of Jericho as my husband continues to fart. He's smoking too, and the pot smoke and farts are leaching into the bedroom where I'm unsafe, locked inside. Oh yay! Update 3. I survived the gas attack. I fell asleep and woke up to a bazillion comments on this. His legs went to sleep, so he fell off the bathroom and ripped the towel rack off the wall. He did try to put the towel rack back, but now I need to buy drywall anchors because if you look at it funny, it just falls off again. He says I'm never doing that again, but he'll probably do something similar in 6 months because I'm on The Truman Show. Update 4. So apparently you can't digest beeswax, so my husband has turned into a human shotgun that's entirely powered by gas. He says it comes in waves, so it's gas. Then beeswax gas, followed by beeswax. I think he ate the entire beehive. Final update. My husband gave himself food. It took him 13 hours, and he had to leave the state because we had a weird Samsung smart fridge. So he got the shelf back and hopped back into his car, which he had been farting in all day long in 90-degree heat and almost bombed from the smell. Then he had to drive 6 hours with all the windows down, stop to buy Depends because he still had food poisoning, and finally make it home to apologize for eating like a 14-year-old boy and breaking my kitchen and trust. He also found a replacement barbecue cover and anchors for the towel bar he destroyed. I stared at the drywall anchors in his hand and grabbed them before he could lose them somewhere. The man had somehow managed to destroy half our house in 3 weeks, and now he wanted to fix things. Beeswax and Taco Bell was still clinging to him. While he showered, I started making a list of everything that needed fixing. The stove, the fridge shelf he'd already replaced, the towel rack, the carpet that still smelled faintly of disaster despite the industrial cleaning. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor asking if everything was okay. I typed back that we were fine, just dealing with some stomach issues. The shower turned off and my husband emerged looking sheepish. He grabbed the anchors and headed to the bathroom to fix the towel rack. I heard drilling sounds followed by a crash and some creative cursing. The towel rack had fallen again, this time taking a chunk of drywall with it. I walked to the bathroom doorway. The hole in the wall was now twice as big as before. He looked up at me with those puppy dog eyes that usually worked, but after the honeycomb incident, I was immune. I told him to stop touching things and just sit on the couch. He shuffled past me and I noticed he was walking funny, probably from spending half the day on the toilet. The dog followed him, keeping a safe distance, as if my husband might explode again at any moment. I called my brother-in-law Robert, who actually knew how to fix things. He answered on the second ring and I could hear him trying not to laugh as I explained the situation. He said he'd come over tomorrow with his tools and help repair the damage. I thanked him and hung up, then noticed my husband had disappeared from the couch. I found him in the garage, still dripping with honey. He said he bought extras because they were such a good deal. I grabbed the box and marched it straight to the garbage can outside, ignoring his protests about wasting money. Back inside, I started opening windows again because the house still smelled like a combination of cleaning products and human disaster. My husband sat on the couch, looking miserable. The dog had finally decided it was safe enough to curl up in its bed, though it kept one eye open, watching him suspiciously. I made myself a sandwich and pointedly didn't offer him any. He could figure out his own food situation that didn't involve raw bee products or fast food. He mumbled something about being hungry and I reminded him that he'd spent 2 weeks eating nothing but Taco Bell and the afternoon dragged on with him alternating between sitting very still and making sudden dashes to the bathroom. Each time he returned, looking paler and more defeated. I almost felt bad for him, but then I remembered the morning's wake-up call and my sympathy evaporated. My phone rang and it was my friend Catherine, whose father had sold him the honeycombs. She was calling to apologize, saying she had no idea he'd bought so many or that he'd actually eat them like that. Her father thought he was buying them for some kind of craft project. I told her it wasn't her fault that my husband had the decision-making skills of a toddler. As evening approached, I started making dinner for myself. The broken stove meant I had to use the microwave and toaster oven, which limited my options. My husband watched me. I ignored him and took my bowl to the dining room. He tried to get up to join me but had to sit back down quickly, his face going green. Another dash to the bathroom followed and I heard him muttering about never eating honeycomb again. The dog looked at me as if to say it had tried to warn us about his poor choices. After dinner, I called a repair service about the stove. The earliest they could come was next week, which meant more creative meal solutions. I made a mental note to hide my credit card so my husband couldn't order any more delivery food while I figured out our kitchen situation. He emerged from the bathroom looking like he'd aged 5 years in 1 day. His phone buzzed and he showed me a text from his brother asking if we needed anything. Apparently, Robert had already spread the word. I could practically feel my husband's embarrassment radiating off him in waves. As bedtime approached, I made it clear he was sleeping on the couch. The bedroom still needed to air out from the morning's chemical warfare, and I wasn't taking any chances on a repeat performance. He nodded meekly and grabbed a pillow and blanket from the closet. I checked on him one last time before heading to bed. He was curled up on the couch looking pathetic. The dog had taken pity on him and was lying on the floor nearby, though still maintaining a safe distance. I reminded him that Robert would be here tomorrow to fix the towel rack and told him not to touch anything else. In the bedroom, I opened my laptop and started researching adult supervision services. The honeycomb thing was weird enough, but combining it with 2 weeks of Taco Bell was like he was trying to destroy his digestive system. I could hear him getting up periodically throughout the night, each trip to the bathroom accompanied by groans and what sounded like prayers to various deities. The dog had given up and retreated to its crate, probably the smartest member of our household at this point. The next morning came too soon. I woke up to find my husband already awake, sitting at the kitchen table and staring at a glass of water like it might bite him. He said he was afraid to put anything in his stomach, which was probably the first sensible thought he'd had in weeks. Robert arrived around noon with his toolbox, still clutching his stomach like it might betray him at any moment. I watched from the kitchen as Robert surveyed the damage to the bathroom wall, shaking his head and muttering something about how his brother had outdone himself this time. While Robert worked on the towel rack, I noticed my husband had disappeared again. I found him in the garage rummaging through boxes on the shelves. When I asked what he was doing, he mumbled something about looking for antacids. I didn't buy it for a second, especially when I saw him quickly shove something behind his back. I demanded he show me what he was hiding. After a brief standoff, he reluctantly produced a beekeeping magazine. My stomach dropped. He started rambling about how eating the honeycomb had given him a new appreciation for bees. How fascinating. I snatched the magazine from his hands and told him absolutely not. Robert finished fixing the towel rack and came to find us in the garage. He took one look at the beekeeping magazine in my hand and burst out laughing. Apparently, my husband had texted him earlier asking about local beekeeping supplies. I glared at both of them while my husband tried to explain that it would be educational, that fresh honey would be amazing, that bees were good for the environment. I marched back inside, leaving them in the garage. The dog followed me, clearly the only one in this house with any sense. I started cleaning up the kitchen, trying to ignore the sound of my husband and Robert discussing hive construction in the garage. When they finally came inside, Robert gave me an apology. I confronted my husband about his bee obsession. He insisted it was just a passing interest, that he was still feeling sick from the honeycomb incident. But I caught him later that afternoon watching beekeeping videos on YouTube, taking notes on his phone. When I walked into the room, he quickly switched to a cooking video, as if that was any more believable. The next few days passed in relative peace. My husband's digestive system slowly returned to normal, and he started eating regular food again. The stove repair technician came and fixed our appliance, though he gave me some strange looks when I explained how it broke. I thought maybe we were past the worst of it. I was wrong. I came home from grocery shopping to find my husband in the... He said he was planning where to put a small greenhouse for vegetables, but I saw the beekeeping supply catalog sticking out of his back pocket. That evening, I called his sister to vent. She laughed and told me this was typical for him. Apparently, when they were kids, he'd become obsessed with raising rabbits after visiting a petting zoo. Their parents had found him trying to convert their basement into a rabbit warren. She said he'd always been like this, latching onto random interests with disturbed intensity. I hung up feeling both validated and concerned. The dog seemed to sense my mood and curled up next to me on the couch. My husband emerged from his home office where he'd been working all evening. I could see the brow. His car was missing, and he'd left a note saying he went to get breakfast. But when he returned 2 hours later, I noticed pine needles on his shoes and sawdust on his jeans. He claimed he'd stopped at the park, but I knew he'd been at the lumberyard. I decided to do some investigating. While he showered, I checked our joint credit card statement online. There were several recent charges to online retailers I didn't recognize. When I searched the company names, they all sold beekeeping equipment. He'd already spent over $300 on supplies. When I confronted him with the evidence, he tried to play it off as research for a friend. But I knew better. He eventually admitted he'd ordered just a few things. Over the next week, packages started arriving. Beekeeping books, protective gear, hive tools. Each time, my husband would intercept the delivery before I could see it, squirreling the items away somewhere. I found some hidden in the garage, others in the garden shed. It was like living with a very poorly organized spy. I tried talking to our friends about it, hoping they might help me talk sense into him. But to my surprise, several of them thought it sounded like a great idea. Our friend Tom even offered to help him build hive boxes, saying his grandfather had been a beekeeper. I felt like I was losing my mind. Catherine called to check in, still feeling guilty about her father's selling. Then she admitted that my husband had already contacted her father about buying an established hive. Her father had refused, saying he needed to see proper setup and permits first. I found my husband that evening in the garden shed, which he'd started converting into what he called a honey house. He'd installed shelves and was organizing his growing collection of beekeeping supplies. When I demanded he stop, he accused me of being unsupportive of his interests. We had our first real fight in years. He stormed off to stay at Robert's house for the night. I spent the evening researching local ordinances about beekeeping, hoping to find some legal reason to shut this down. The dog stayed close to me, sensing the tension. I discovered our city did allow backyard beekeeping. My husband returned with Robert, who tried to mediate between us. He suggested maybe my husband could take a beekeeping class first, learn properly before jumping in. My husband eagerly agreed, and I reluctantly accepted this compromise, hoping the class would either satisfy his curiosity or show him how much work it actually was. But the class only made things worse. He came home from the first session practically buzzing with excitement, full of facts about queen bees and honey production. He'd made friends with other aspiring beekeepers and joined their online forum. Our dinner conversations became lectures about colony collapse disorder and the importance of native pollinators. When I complained, he said I was being dramatic, that lots of people had hobbies. But this felt different, more intense. One morning, I discovered he'd been getting up early to work on the shed conversion. He'd installed ventilation and was building extraction equipment. When I asked how he was paying for all this, he admitted he'd been selling things online, his gaming console, some tools, even his watch collection, all for his bee obsession. I reached out to his siblings for help. They agreed to stage what they called an intervention. But when they arrived, my husband had prepared a whole presentation about the benefits of beekeeping. He had charts about honey profits, environmental impact studies, even testimony. When I asked who it was, he said it was just a work call. But I later discovered he'd been talking to a bee supplier 2 states away, trying to arrange an under-the-table hive purchase since local suppliers required proof of proper setup. I started documenting everything, the receipts, the shed modifications, the secretive phone calls. I wasn't sure why, but something told me I might need evidence of this madness. The dog had taken to sleeping in my room, away from the garage where my husband spent most of his time now. Then came the day I found him in the backyard with Tom, building what was clearly a hive stand. They told me they were fixing the fence, but there it was, a wooden platform designed to hold beehives. When I confronted them, I called a family meeting with his parents and siblings. I laid out everything that had been happening, hoping they'd see how out of control this had gotten. His mother admitted he'd called her asking to borrow money for an investment opportunity. His father said he'd noticed charges on their shared business credit card for bee supplies. The confrontation didn't go as planned. My husband turned it around, claiming I was trying to control him, that I'd never supported his interests. He brought up how I'd gone to South Korea without him, how I'd left him alone for 3 weeks. Some family members actually started taking his side, saying maybe beekeeping would be good for him. I felt isolated and frustrated. Even some of our mutual friends thought I was overreacting. They'd say things like, the financial drain, the way he'd completely transformed our garden shed without discussing it with me. One evening, I came home to find a truck in our driveway. My husband and 2 men were unloading white wooden boxes, beehives. My heart sank. He'd actually done it. When I demanded an explanation, he said they were just empty hives, that he was storing them for a friend. But I recognized one of the men as the bee supplier from 2 states away. The next morning, I woke up to a strange humming sound. Looking out the window, I saw my husband in a full bee suit, installing what was clearly an active hive in our backyard. He'd done it in the early morning, thinking I wouldn't notice. But the sound of thousands of bees is hard to miss. Our neighbor Mrs. Chen came out to see what the commotion was about. When she saw the hive, her face went pale. Her grandson was severely allergic to bee stings. The situation spiraled from there. Mrs. Chen called other neighbors who called the city. My husband insisted he had the right to keep bees, that he'd followed all the regulations. But he hadn't notified the neighbors as required, hadn't gotten the proper permits. He'd thought he could establish the hives first and handle paperwork later. By afternoon, we had a city inspector at our door. My husband tried to charm him, offering fresh honey and explaining the environmental benefits. But the inspector was unmoved. He cited multiple violations and gave us 48 hours to remove the hives or face fines. I hadn't made the call, but he didn't believe me. He started ranting about how I'd never understood him, how I was standing in the way of his happiness. The dog hid under the bed as his voice grew louder and more agitated. I tried to reason with him, pointing out the legal issues, the neighbors' concerns, the fact that he'd lied to me repeatedly. But he just kept deflecting, making me the villain in his beekeeping saga. He even suggested we should move to a more bee-friendly neighborhood, as if uprooting our entire life for his week-old obsession was reasonable. The next day, while he was at his beekeeping class, I took action. I called a professional bee removal service and arranged for them to safely relocate the hive. I also changed the locks on the garden shed and put all his bees. His reaction was explosive. He called me controlling, said I'd destroyed his dreams. He threatened to leave, to find someone who would support his interests. I stood my ground, reminding him of the honeycomb incident, the broken stove, the destroyed bathroom, and now this. His pattern of destructive obsessions was clear, and I wasn't enabling it anymore. He slammed the door and drove off to Robert's house again. I spent the evening packing up the remaining bee supplies into boxes, labeling each one with the receipt total. The dog watched me work, occasionally sniffing at the smoker and backing away with a sneeze. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with texts from mutual friends. My husband had apparently been messaging The next morning, I woke up to find my husband's car in the driveway, but no sign of him. I checked the garage and found him asleep on the floor next to the boxes of bee supplies, clutching a bee suit like a security blanket. The dog nudged him with its nose and he stirred, looking disoriented. I made coffee while he stumbled into the house. He sat at the kitchen table staring at the boxes I'd packed without saying anything. He started going through them, checking each item against the receipts I'd attached. His face grew paler with each price tag. My phone rang. It was Catherine's father, asking if we still needed the bees removed. I told him they were already gone and he sounded relieved. He mentioned that my husband had been calling him daily, sometimes multiple times, asking about different... My husband disappeared again. I found him in the backyard, standing where the hive had been. He was holding his phone, taking pictures of the empty space. I watched from the window as he walked around the yard, pointing at different spots and mumbling to himself. Robert showed up unannounced, looking tired. He said my husband had kept him up all night talking about bees and how I didn't understand his vision. Robert had finally told him to go home and talk to me like an adult. My husband had driven around for hours instead before sleeping in our garage. I showed Robert the boxes of supplies and the receipts. He whistled at the total, over $2,000 now. He helped me load everything into his truck, saying he'd store it at his place until my husband came to his senses. My husband, Chen, knocked on our door with her grandson. The boy had an EpiPen in his hand, and she explained how terrified they'd been about the bees. My husband actually looked ashamed for the first time. He apologized to them, and I could see something shift in his expression. After they left, he sat on the couch with the dog. I joined them, keeping space between us. He started talking about his childhood, how his parents never let him have pets or hobbies. I'd heard these stories before, but this time I noticed how he used them to justify his current behavior. I pulled out my laptop and showed him the documentation I'd been keeping. Screenshots of purchases, photos of the shed modifications, records of the lies he'd told. He stayed, saying I was making him look worse than he was, but the evidence was clear. The secret purchases, the hidden supplies, the way he'd manipulated our friends. Tom had even sent me messages apologizing, saying my husband had told him I'd approved the hive stand construction. My husband's phone rang. It was his boss, asking why he'd missed 3 days of work. He'd been calling in sick to attend beekeeping workshops and visit apiaries. As he stammered out excuses, I realized this went deeper than I'd thought. The dog retreated to its crate, sensing the tension building. After he hung up, I gave him an ultimatum. He could get help for his obsessive behavior or he could find somewhere else to live. I wasn't going through another honeycomb incident or whatever his next fixation. But this time I didn't chase him. I called the locksmith and had the locks changed on the house. Then I called his sister and told her what was happening. She wasn't surprised. She mentioned their uncle had the same pattern, jumping from obsession to obsession, leaving chaos in his wake. 2 days passed without contact. I focused on getting the house back in order. The stove was finally properly repaired, the bathroom wall patched correctly by a professional. The lingering smell of the honeycomb disaster had finally faded. The dog seemed more relaxed without the constant tension. Then packages started arriving again, but this time they were returned. My husband had apparently been sending back the bee supplies he'd ordered online. He showed up on the 3rd day with his brother and sister. They'd staged their own intervention, taking him to see their uncle who'd lost his marriage to similar behavior. My husband looked exhausted, but clearer somehow. He asked if we could talk. I let them in, but kept the new keys. His siblings stayed as witnesses while he apologized, not just for the bees but for the pattern. He admitted he'd already been researching aquaponics systems before I'd shut down the bee operation. The cycle would have continued. He agreed to see a therapist who specialized in obsessive behaviors. His first appointment was already scheduled. He also agreed to transparency with all purchases and to discuss any new interest before acting on it. His siblings volunteered to help monitor. He petted it gently, and I saw him really look at our pet for the first time in weeks. He'd been so focused on bees, he barely acknowledged the actual animal in our house. The dog licked his hand and settled at his feet. We worked out a trial arrangement. He could come home, but the shed remained off limits and I controlled the finances temporarily. Any new hobby had to be approved by both me and his therapist. It felt like treating a child, but after the honeycomb to beehive pipeline, I needed safeguards. The first week was rough. I caught him browsing aquaponics forums twice. He'd started watching documentaries about sustainable farming, but each time he caught himself and told me about it. The therapist said this was progress, recognizing the money went toward repairing the damage from his various disasters. He winced seeing the hive boxes go to another buyer, but didn't protest. The dog supervised the sales, as if making sure everything really left. His coworkers had apparently been concerned about his behavior too. His boss called to check in, mentioning the strange bee-themed presentations my husband had been giving during meetings. We added workplace behavior to his therapy goals. He needed to keep his obsessions from affecting his job. One evening, I found him in the garage looking at the empty space where he'd stored hive parts. But instead of seeming sad, he looked thoughtful. He told me the therapist had helped him realize he was trying to fill. It gave him something to do with his restless energy. He'd point out different flowers and mention which ones bees preferred, but he'd catch himself before launching into lectures. The dog loved the new routine. Catherine visited to apologize again for her father's role. My husband apologized to her for harassing her father with calls. She mentioned her dad had actually felt bad for him, recognizing the obsessive behavior. Her father had gone through something similar with Orchid growing in his youth. Slowly, things normalized. The house was fully repaired. My husband attended therapy twice a week. He joined a hiking group to channel his energy into something that didn't require major purchases. He'd completed the first phase of treatment for obsessive behavior patterns. We celebrated with dinner at a normal restaurant, not Taco Bell. He even cooked a simple meal the next day without destroying the kitchen. The shed remained locked, now holding just normal garden tools. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at it, but he never asked for the key. His therapist had helped him understand that the shed represented his need to create secret spaces for his obsessions. Keeping it locked was symbolic. His family stayed involved, checking in regularly. His sister joked that at least his obsessions were legal, unlike their cousin who'd become fixated on street racing. We could laugh about it now. He'd researched dog training but hadn't bought any equipment or tried to transform our yard into an agility course. He was just spending time with our pet, enjoying the simple interaction. Real progress. The bee incident became a turning point. Friends who'd initially taken his side apologized when they learned the full extent of his deception. Tom felt especially guilty for enabling him. We rebuilt those relationships carefully with new boundaries in place. As our anniversary approached, I wondered if we'd make it. The therapy was working, but trust takes time to rebuild. He surprised me by planning a simple dinner at home, no grand gestures or new obsessions, just us, just ownership and a promise to keep working on himself. The dog tried to eat the envelope, bringing some lightness to the moment. Looking back, the honeycomb incident was the beginning of the end of our old pattern. His digestive disaster had led to an obsession that finally pushed things too far. But it also led to him getting help. Sometimes you need to hit rock bottom. Even if that bottom is covered in beeswax and Taco Bell, we're still together, still working on things. The dog is thriving with all the attention and walks. The house is intact, and my husband hasn't developed any new obsessions, though I keep the shed locked just in case. Trust but verify, especially when your partner once ate enough honeycomb to become. I divorced my husband because he tightened every jar lid in our house so hard I couldn't open them. I know it sounds insane, but hear me out. My husband Tom had this weird habit of screwing jar lids on like he was sealing a nuclear warhead. It started when we were dating, back when he'd just come over to my place for dinner. I'd find the pickle jar or the spaghetti sauce locked tighter than a bank vault. At first, I thought it was cute, like he was showing off his strength or something. I'd laugh, hand him the jar, and he'd pop it open with this smug little grin. But over the years, it stopped being funny. It became every single jar, jam, olives, hot pepper paste, you name it. I'd strain until my hands were red, tap the lid. We'd been married 5 years, and this jar thing was a constant cycle. I'd beg him to stop tightening them so much. He'd claim it was to keep the food fresh, which I call BS on. I mean, I'd rather my salsa go bad than starve because I can't get to it. Then he'd switch to saying it was just a habit, like he couldn't help it. Things would get better for a week or two after I'd lose it, screaming in the kitchen, looking like a total lunatic over a jar of mango puree, but then it would creep back. Every lid, every time, tighter than ever. It wasn't just annoying, it felt personal, like he was doing it to mess with me. I started to dread cooking, knowing I'd have to wrestle with a jar first. I'd buy duplicates of things, just ask Tom to open them. But that's not the point. I shouldn't have to beg my husband to access my own food in my own house. The breaking point came last month when Tom had to leave town for 10 days. His mom had a health scare, so he flew out to help. I was home alone, and the first night I went to make tacos, I grabbed the salsa jar stuck. I tried everything, banging it on the counter, using a rubber grip. Nothing. I was so pissed I almost drove to the store to buy a new one, but then I ran into my neighbor Mike outside. Mike's this chill guy, maybe in his 50s, always tinkering in his garage. I jokingly mentioned the jar, and he offered to help. I handed it over and he popped it open in 2 seconds. I laughed at him. He came over, tackled the fridge and pantry, and took 2 stubborn ones, a jar of figs and some hot fudge to his garage. When he returned, he'd opened the hot fudge but had to smash the figs. Then he said, "This wasn't an accident. Every jar's like this, and Tom doesn't use half this stuff. His words hit me hard. I sank to the kitchen floor crying, chest tight with betrayal. That night, I realized it wasn't just about the lids, it was control years of feeling manipulated. By morning, I'd decided to divorce Tom. I called a lawyer and started packing. When he got back, I told him it was over. He denied it, begged for counseling, but I was done. That was 2 weeks ago. I initially stayed with my sister keeps sending me links to marriage counselors. Even Jenna, who was letting me crash on her couch, gently suggested I might be having some kind of breakdown. Jar lids? She said last night over wine. You have to admit, it sounds a little extreme. I just nodded and took another sip of my drink. Maybe it does sound extreme from the outside, but I know the truth now. It was never about the jars. I didn't go back to the house for almost a week after filing the divorce papers. I needed the space, and honestly, I was scared of Tom's reaction. When I finally worked up the courage to go collect more of my things, I made sure Jenna came with me. I didn't want to be alone with Tom, not after realizing how manipulative he'd been all these years. And there were papers scattered across the front lawn. My stomach did this weird flip thing as I got out of the car. That's not a good sign, Jenna muttered, eyeing the mess. I approached cautiously and pushed the door open. The inside of the house looked like a tornado had hit it. Drawers pulled out, furniture moved, picture frames knocked over. For a second I panicked, thinking we'd been robbed. Then I spotted Tom sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by folders and documents, a glass of whiskey next to him despite it being only 11:30 a.m. "Oh, look who finally decided to show up," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Come to take more from me?" I froze in the doorway. "In 5 years of marriage, we're just here to get some of her clothes and personal items," she said firmly. "We'll be quick." Tom laughed, a hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "Good luck with that. I've been doing some organizing." I didn't like the sound of that. I headed straight for the bedroom, trying to ignore the chaos around me. When I opened my closet, my heart sank. Empty. Completely empty, except for a few wire hangers swinging sadly. "Tom!" I called out, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Where are my clothes?" "Donated them," he replied casually as he wandered into the bedroom doorway. "You know, to that women's shelter downtown. Figured if you didn't want to be my wife anymore, you didn't need the things I bought you." "You... what?" I checked the credit card statements. About 70% of your wardrobe was purchased with my card. I stood there, mouth open, trying to process what he was saying. Yes, Tom made more money than I did, and yes, we often used his credit card for shopping, but that was our arrangement. We were married, we shared expenses. Now he was acting like he'd been my personal shopper or something. "That's not how marriage works, Tom. We shared finances. Those clothes were mine, regardless of which card was used." He shrugged. "Tell that to the judge. I've been talking to my lawyer too, you know." That's when I noticed the stack of financial documents on the bed. Bank statements, investment records, mortgage papers, all with post-it notes and highlighter marked. "Did you know that my name is on basically everything we own? The house, both cars, the investment accounts. Even that fancy stand mixer you love so much was purchased with my Best Buy credit card." My blood ran cold. He was right. When we got married, it just made sense to put the big purchases in his name since his credit was better. The house was in both our names, but he'd made the down payment from his savings before we were married, which meant he owned a larger share. "You can't just keep everything, Tom. That's not how divorce works." "Maybe not everything," he conceded, "but a lot more than you think. Especially since I can prove I financially contributed more to this marriage. A lot more." Jenna, who had been silently watching this, "We'll see what the court says. Oh, and you might want to check the guest room before you leave." He walked away, disappearing back into the living room. With a growing sense of dread, I headed to the guest room. There, piled haphazardly in the center of the floor, were some of my clothes, old t-shirts, worn jeans, things I'd had since before I met Tom. Basically, anything he couldn't claim he'd paid for. My nice dresses, my professional work clothes, my good winter coat, all gone. I sank to my knees beside the pile, reality crashing down on me. Tom wasn't just upset about the divorce, he was preparing for war, and he'd already seized the high ground. "He can't do this," Jenna kept saying as we stuffed what remained of my... I trusted him. We grabbed what we could and left quickly. Tom didn't even look up as we passed through the living room. He was too busy sorting through more paperwork, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The next few days were a blur of panicked phone calls. I called my lawyer, who confirmed my worst fears. While I was entitled to an equitable distribution of marital assets, Tom's meticulous record-keeping could potentially work in his favor, especially if he could prove he contributed more financially. The clothes were a gray area, technically personal property, but hard to claim without receipts. He's building a case that you were essentially a dependent, my lawyer explained. It's manipulative and aggressive, but not entirely without legal merit. I hung up though, and I'd never once considered that Tom might be keeping score, mentally tallying up every purchase to use against me someday. 2 days later, I got a text from Tom that made my blood boil. Found your grandmother's recipe box. Let me know if it's important to you. That recipe box was one of my most treasured possessions. My grandmother had given it to me before she died, filled with handwritten family recipes going back generations. It wasn't valuable in any monetary sense, but it was irreplaceable to me, and Tom knew it. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I called my lawyer again, who advised me not to engage directly with Tom anymore. All communication should go through legal channels. She promised to send a formal request. I got an email with a spreadsheet attached, a detailed breakdown of our finances over the past 5 years, categorized and color-coded. For your reference, the email said, thought you might want to know what you're walking away from. According to Tom's calculations, if we proceeded with the divorce and split assets according to contribution, I'd lose the house, both cars, and access to about 80% of our savings and investments. I'd be left with basically nothing except my personal items, what remained of them, and a pittance of cash. At the bottom of the email was a note. Of course, if you reconsider this hasty decision, we could just go back to sharing everything. Your choice. It was blackmail, pure and simple. Stay in the marriage or leave with nothing. That night, this was so much worse than I'd anticipated. I'd wanted freedom, but it seemed like I might have to trade everything for it. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of texts from my sister, Emma. "What the hell is wrong with you?" the first one read. Tom just called me in tears. My heart sank as I scrolled through message after message. Apparently, Tom had called not just Emma, but my parents and several of our mutual friends. He'd told them I was having some kind of breakdown, that I'd filed for divorce over jar lids and was refusing his attempts at reconciliation. He claimed he was worried about my mental health and wanted their help to talk sense into me. I tried calling Emma to explain, but she wasn't having it. Jar lids? About him deliberately making me dependent on him. "He said you'd say something like that," Emma replied coldly. "He told us you've been creating this whole narrative in your head, turning him into some kind of villain." I hung up, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Then my parents called, then 2 of my closest friends. All of them had heard Tom's version of events, and all of them thought I was being ridiculous. No one was listening to me. "It sounds paranoid," my dad said gently. "Sweetie, are you sure you're not just stressed from work? Maybe you need a vacation, not a divorce." By the end of the day, I felt completely isolated. Everyone thought I was overreacting at best, having a mental breakdown at worst. The only person who believed me was Jenna, and even she occasionally. I sat on Jenna's balcony, staring blankly at the sunset and wondering if I was making a massive mistake. Maybe I was blowing this whole thing out of proportion. Maybe Tom's jar tightening really was just an annoying habit, not a deliberate power play. Maybe. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Jenna poked her head out. "Someone's here to see you." To my surprise, it was Mike, my neighbor. He was holding a small cardboard box and looking concerned. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," he said after Jenna introduced us properly. "Tom mentioned you were staying with a friend, and I got your address from the divorce papers taped to your front door." "He what?" I gasped. Mike grimaced. "Yeah, not as classy as Moon." "I also brought you these," Mike said, handing me the box. Inside were several jars, olives, pickles, pasta sauce, all with lids that twisted off easily. "Thought you might need your own stash." The gesture was so unexpectedly kind that I felt tears welling up again. Mike seemed to sense my emotional state and quickly changed the subject, asking if he could help with anything else. "Actually," I said, wiping my eyes, "there is something. Tom has my grandmother's recipe box. It's really important to me, and he's basically holding it hostage." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "I still have a spare key to your house from when I used to water your plants when you traveled. If you want, I could try to retrieve it." I hesitated. Legal, but I'm afraid of facing Tom right now. Mike promised to try the next day when Tom typically went to the gym. As he was leaving, he turned back. "For what it's worth, I believe you. About the jars, about all of it. Tom's behavior isn't normal." After he left, I felt a tiny spark of hope for the first time in days. Someone believed me, someone understood. It wasn't much, but it was something. True to his word, Mike texted me the next afternoon with a photo of my grandmother's recipe box, safe in his kitchen. Mission accomplished. Tom was out. Got in and out in 5 minutes. "Noticed a few other things of yours he's been mistreating. Want me to go back for anything else?" I was so relieved I almost started crying. An hour later, Mike confirmed he'd rescued both items. The jewelry box was in the bathroom cabinet, shoved behind some cleaning supplies. The photo albums were in the garage, stacked near the recycling bin. The recycling bin. Tom had been planning to throw out my family photos. That night, I went to Mike's house to collect my rescued treasures. He invited me in for coffee, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I found myself relaxing a little as we talked. Mike was surprisingly easy to talk to. He was divorced himself, had been for about 8 years, and understood the emotional roller coaster I was on. He didn't judge or dismiss my feelings, he just listened and offered practical advice. It might not be 50-50, but it won't be nothing. Over the next few days, Mike became my unexpected ally. He kept an eye on the house and updated me on Tom's activities. He retrieved more of my personal items during Tom's predictable absences. He even helped me document the condition of the house and my possessions, taking photos that might be useful for my lawyer. Meanwhile, Tom escalated his campaign. He'd started telling people I was having an affair, a complete fabrication, and suggested that was the real reason for the divorce. He froze our joint bank account, leaving me with just my personal account that had a few $100s in it. He canceled my credit card, which was on his account. He even contacted my workplace, telling my boss. My parents called daily, alternating between concern for my mental health and lectures about the sanctity of marriage. Friends started taking sides, and most chose Tom Charming, stable Tom, who was just trying to save his marriage. 2 weeks into this nightmare, I hit rock bottom. My lawyer called with bad news. The temporary financial support I'd requested was denied by the judge, who wanted more evidence of financial need. Tom's car, which had been in his name and which I'd been using during our marriage, got repossessed while I was at work, leaving me stranded and humiliated. And Jenna, while still supportive, gently suggested it might be time for me to find other accommodations as her boyfriend was moving in soon. I sat in my cubicle, first and last month's rent, good credit, all things I didn't have access to anymore. I was facing homelessness, all because I dared to leave a controlling husband. When I got back to Jenna's that evening via an expensive Uber since my car was gone, there was a note from Mike taped to the door. "Call me when you get this," it said with his number underneath. I called, and Mike answered immediately. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said without preamble. "I have a proposition for you." Mike owned a duplex. He lived in one side and rented out the other. His tenant had moved out the previous month, and he hadn't gotten around to finding a new one yet. He offered to let me stay there, rent-free, until my divorce was settled. "I can't accept that," I protested. "Or help me renovate the place. It needs painting and some minor repairs." I was speechless, overwhelmed by his generosity. After some back and forth, I agreed to move in temporarily and help with the renovations as a form of rent. It wasn't charity that way, it was an exchange. The next day, Mike helped me move my meager possessions from Jenna's to the duplex. The space was small but clean, a one-bedroom unit with basic furniture and a tiny kitchen. It felt like a palace compared to Jenna's couch. "Make yourself at home," Mike said as he carried in the last box. "I'm next door if you need anything, but I'll respect your privacy." That first night in my new temporary home, I slept better than I had in weeks. Our small town's gossip network was highly efficient. The texts started the very next day. "Shacking up with the neighbor already? Classy. Does Mike know you're crazy? Better warn him about your jar phobia. Hope you know this just proves what I'm telling everyone. You've been cheating all along." I didn't respond to any of that. Instead, I blocked his number and focused on rebuilding my life, one small step at a time. Living next door to Mike turned out to be exactly what I needed. He was respectful of my space, but available when I needed help or just someone to talk to. We fell into an easy routine: coffee together most mornings before work, occasional shared dinners, weekend renovation projects on the rental unit. He understood betrayal and the painful process of starting over. He never pushed for details about my marriage, but listened when I needed to vent. As the weeks passed, I started feeling like myself again. I set up automatic transfers from my paycheck to a savings account, determined to build my financial independence. I thrifted new clothes to replace what Tom had donated. I even started cooking again, using recipes from my grandmother's box that Mike had rescued. The jar lids in Mike's house, I noticed, were always tightened just enough to be secure, but easily opened. I never had to ask for help, never had to strain or struggle. It was such a small thing, but it meant everything to me. "I noticed Tom's jar thing years ago," he said casually. "Always thought it was weird how you'd struggle with them when he wasn't around." I nearly fell off the ladder. "You noticed? Why didn't you say anything?" Mike shrugged, focusing on rolling paint onto the wall. "Not my place to interfere in someone else's marriage." But I wondered. Wondered what? If it was just jars, or if there were other things. Small ways he made you dependent on him. I climbed down from the ladder and sat on the drop cloth, suddenly needing to be at eye level for this conversation. There were lots of things. The jars were just the most obvious. Mike nodded, still painting. Controlling behavior usually starts small, things that seem helpful at first. Then one day you realize you can't make a move without him. The accuracy of his assessments stunned me. That's exactly how it happened. How did you know? My sister went through something similar, he explained. Her husband would move her car keys, then help her find them, made her think she was getting forgetful. By the time she left him, she thought she had early onset dementia. Turned out she was perfectly fine once he wasn't gaslighting her anymore. We painted in silence for a while after that, but something had shifted between us. Mike understood what I'd been through in a way no one else did. He saw the reality behind the jar lid story that everyone else dismissed. That evening, we ordered pizza and ate it on his back porch. The conversation flowed. When our hands accidentally touched over the last slice, I felt a tiny spark of something I hadn't experienced in a long time. I pushed the feeling away immediately. I was still technically married, still in the middle of a messy divorce. The last thing I needed was to develop feelings for someone new, especially the one person who was helping me get back on my feet. Besides, Mike had been nothing but kind and respectful. There was no indication he saw me as anything other than a friend in need. The divorce proceedings dragged on. Tom continued to fight me on every front, refusing to negotiate, demanding full possession of almost everything we'd owned together. My lawyer warned, he thinks if he makes this painful enough, you'll come crawling back. But I wasn't crawling anywhere. With each passing week, I grew stronger, more determined. I picked up extra shifts at work to build my savings. I completed a free online financial literacy course. I started therapy to process the emotional manipulation I'd endured for years. And always, Mike was there, not solving my problems for me, but offering support when I needed it. He drove me to lawyer appointments when I was still carless. He helped me research affordable vehicles when I was ready to buy one. He celebrated my small victories and listened to my frustrations. 2 months after moving into Mike's duplex, I bought a used Honda with cash. Not to independence, he toasted, clinking his glass against mine. To opening my own damn jars, I replied, making him laugh. That night, sitting on my small porch watching fireflies blink in the yard we shared, I realized something important. I was happy. Not deliriously joyful, not problem-free, but genuinely content in a way I hadn't been for years. I had a safe place to live, a reliable car, a growing savings account, and a friend who respected me. Tom might take the house, the fancy kitchen appliances, even the furniture we'd picked out together, but he couldn't take this feeling of reclaiming my life, one small piece at a time. The next morning, I woke to a text, fidgeting with her cup lid as I sat down across from her. I owe you an apology, she said finally, the words coming out in a rush. I saw Tom yesterday at the grocery store. He was with Karen from his office. Karen was Tom's administrative assistant, a pretty blonde about 10 years his junior. I'd always felt uncomfortable about how often Tom mentioned her, but had dismissed it as professional admiration. They seemed close, Emma continued, like really close, holding hands, kissing in the cereal aisle close. I waited for the jealousy, the hurt, the anger to hit me. But all I felt was a strange sense of validation. How long do you think it's been going on? I asked calmly. Emma looked surprised. Based on what I saw, I'd guessed before. They looked way too comfortable together for this to be new. We talked for over an hour. I finally told Emma everything, not just about the jars, but about all the ways Tom had controlled and manipulated me, about the financial threats, the stolen possessions, the isolation tactics. For the first time, she really listened. I'm so sorry, she said when I finished. I should have trusted you. It's just that Tom was always so charming, so convincing. That's how manipulators operate, I replied. They make sure everyone thinks they're the good guy. By the time we parted, Emma had promised to talk to our parents, to help them understand what was really happening. One small piece of my support. I've seen them together a few times, he admitted. Wasn't sure if I should tell you. Why didn't you? He considered this. Honestly, I didn't think it would help. You were already dealing with so much, and it seemed like adding one more betrayal to the pile. He was right, of course. Finding out about Karen earlier wouldn't have changed anything, except maybe to add more pain to an already painful situation. The next week brought an unexpected development. My lawyer called with news. Tom wanted to settle. Apparently, the Karen situation had complications, namely, her husband finding out and threatening a workplace harassment suit. Tom's company was pressuring him to resolve his divorce quickly and quietly to avoid scandal. A fair cash settlement for my portion of the house equity, and all of my personal possessions returned. In exchange, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances of our divorce. Take it, my lawyer advised. It's a better deal than we'd likely get if we continued fighting. I signed the papers the next day. Just like that, after months of struggle, it was almost over. There would be a mandatory waiting period before the divorce was finalized, but the financial battle was done. That evening, I sat on my porch steps, feeling strangely empty. For so long, fighting Tom had been my focus, my purpose. Now that it was essentially over, I wasn't sure what came next. Mike found me there as dusk was falling. We settled today. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice gentle. Relieved, sad, confused, hopeful. I laughed a little. All of the above, I guess. Mike nodded. "That sounds about right." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one. Then Mike stood up, offering me his hand. "Come on," he said, "I want to show you something." He led me to his kitchen, where an array of jars was set out on the counter. Pickles, olives, pasta sauce, jam, all the staples. "What's this?" I asked, confused. Mike handed me a jar of pickles. "Open it." I twisted the lid, and it came off easily. He handed me another jar and another. Each one wanted to make sure you always had jars you could open in this house. The gesture was so unexpectedly kind that I felt tears welling up again. Here was a man who understood that it had never really been about the jars. It was about respect, about agency, about being heard. And instead of dismissing my feelings or telling me I was overreacting, he'd done something tangible to show he got it. In that moment, standing in Mike's kitchen surrounded by easily opened jars, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been fighting for weeks. I had feelings for him, strong feelings, but it was too soon, too complicated. I was still technically married, still recovering from years of, and for a brief moment I thought I saw something in his eyes that mirrored my own confusing feelings. But he just nodded and started putting the jars away. "By the way," he said casually, "I've been thinking. Since you've been such a big help with the renovations and the place is looking great now, would you be interested in staying, as a proper tenant, I mean? Fair market rent once your divorce settlement comes through, but no rush until then." It was the perfect solution. I could maintain my independence while staying in the place that had become my sanctuary, and I could keep Mike in my life, whatever that might mean for the future. "I'd like that," I replied. "Very much." 2 days later, a large box arrived on my doorstep. Inside was every possession Tom. No explanation. I guessed Karen had found out about his petty revenge tactics and forced him to return my things. I carried the box inside, feeling strange about having these items back. They represented my old life, my married self. I wasn't sure they fit who I was becoming. After some thought, I decided to keep only what truly mattered to me and donate the rest. I was building a new life now, making my own choices, and those choices included letting go of the past jars, lids, and all. I spent that night sorting through the box of my old possessions, deciding what to keep and what to donate. It felt weirdly therapeutic, like I was literally sorting through pieces of my past life. I kept the stand mixer because, honestly, that thing was. The next morning, Mike knocked on my door with coffee, something that had become our little routine. "What's with all the bags?" he asked, nodding toward the pile by my door. "Tom returned my stuff. I'm keeping some, donating the rest." I took a sip of coffee. "Thanks for this, by the way." "No problem. Need help dropping that stuff off?" I nodded, grateful for his offer. We loaded everything into his truck and drove to the local women's shelter. The irony wasn't lost on me that these clothes were coming back to the same place Tom claimed he'd donated them to in the first place. When we got back, Mike mentioned he was working on fixing the bathroom sink in his unit and asked if I'd mind him taking a look at mine too while he had his tools out. "Sure, it's been dripping anyway," I said. "Easy fix," he said, reaching for his toolbox. As he worked, I leaned against the door frame, thinking about how different this felt from when Tom used to fix things around our house. With Tom, home repairs were always a production. He'd make a big show of his handyman skills, explaining every step like I was a child, then expect endless praise for changing a light bulb. Mike just quietly fixed things without the performance. "All set," Mike said, tightening the last connection. He tested the faucet. "No more dripping." "Thanks," I said. "What do I owe you for plumbing services? Dinner?" "Dinner," he suggested with a small smile. "I was thinking of trying that new Thai place." My stomach did a little flip. Was this a date, or just too? Later that evening, we sat across from each other at the restaurant, menus in hand. I couldn't help noticing how different this felt from dinners with Tom. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, just easy conversation and genuinely enjoying each other's company. Our food arrived, and Mike scooped some of his curry onto my plate without asking. "Thought you might want to try this. It's amazing." Such a small gesture, but it hit me hard. Tom would have never shared his food. He'd order precisely what he wanted and eat every bite, even if I expressed interest in trying it. Another tiny control thing I'd never recognized until now. After dinner, we walked back to his truck. The night was warm, stars blew. Thanks for suggesting it. It was, Mike agreed. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead just opened my door for me. Back at the duplex, we lingered in the shared front yard, neither of us seeming ready to end the evening. Finally, Mike cleared his throat. Listen, I've been wanting to say something, but I'm not sure if it's the right time. My heart sped up. What is it? I like you, he said simply. Not just as a friend or a tenant, but I understand if you're not ready for anything more than friendship. You've been through a lot. I took a deep breath. I like you too, and you're right, the timing is complicated. I'm still technically married for another few weeks. Mike nodded. No pressure, just wanted you to know where I stand. Slow is good. He reached out and squeezed my hand briefly, then headed toward his side of the duplex. Good night. Good night, I replied, feeling both nervous and excited about this new possibility. The next few weeks passed in a kind of pleasant limbo. Mike and I continued our coffee mornings and occasional shared meals. We worked on house projects together. We talked about everything and nothing. But there was a new undercurrent to our interactions. Lingering looks, brief touches, a mutual awareness that we were waiting for something to change. Meanwhile, my divorce proceeded smoothly after the settlement. Tom seemed to have lost interest in tormenting me now that he had Karen. My lawyer called with updates. I set down my roller and went to answer it, surprised to find my parents standing on the porch. Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? I hadn't seen them since before filing for divorce. Our phone conversations had been strained at best. Emma told us everything, my mom said. About Tom, about what he did. We came to apologize. I stood frozen for a moment, then stepped back to let them in. They looked around my small rental, taking in the fresh paint and simple furnishings. It's nice, my dad said. Cozy. We sat in my living room, the conversation awkward at first. They admitted they should have believed me from the start. They'd been so focused on preserving my marriage that they hadn't considered it might not be worth saving. We just thought jar lids seemed so trivial, my mom. It was about control. My dad nodded, looking genuinely regretful. We understand that now, especially after finding out about his involvement with that woman from his office. We talked for over an hour. They asked about my plans, my job, my future. I told them about the settlement, about establishing my independence. I didn't mention my growing feelings for Mike that seemed like a conversation for another day. As they were leaving, my mom hugged me tight. We're proud of you, she whispered. You're stronger than we gave you credit for. After they left, I sat on my porch steps feeling lighter. Another broken piece of my life repaired. I looked up to see Mike coming around the side of the house with his lawnmower. Was that your parents? He called over the sound of the engine. My phone pinged with a text from my lawyer. Judge signed off on final divorce decree today. You are officially a free woman. Congratulations. I stared at the message, a strange mix of emotions washing over me. Relief, definitely. Sadness for what could have been. But mostly, an overwhelming sense of possibility. My future was entirely my own now. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and ran next door to Mike's. I knocked rapidly, almost bouncing with nervous energy. He opened the door, looking concerned. Everything okay? My divorce is final, I blurted out. It's done, official. His expression softened into a smile. That's great news. How do you feel? We could celebrate your newfound freedom. I followed him into his kitchen, where he poured 2 glasses of red wine. To new beginnings, he toasted. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against his. We moved to his living room, sitting closer on the couch than we normally would. The conversation flowed easily, but there was a new tension in the air, an awareness of the barrier that had fallen. So, Mike said finally, setting down his wine glass, we agreed to take things slow until your divorce was final. I nodded, my heart beating fast. And now it's figure it out together. So where does that leave us? He asked, his voice soft. I'm not sure, I admitted. I know I have feelings for you, strong ones, but I'm still figuring out who I am on my own. Mike reached at whatever pace feels right. I looked down at our joined hands, then back up at his face. Before I could overthink it, I leaned forward and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as he pulled me closer. When we broke apart, I felt dizzy in the best possible way. That was long overdue, Mike whispered, smiling. We spent the rest of the evening talking and occasionally kissing, setting no expectations beyond enjoying each other's company. It felt right in a way nothing had for a very long time. 3 days later, I got another unexpected visitor. I opened my door to find Tom standing there, looking uncomfortable. What do you want? I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I came to return this, he said, holding out a small box, which I'd thought was lost years ago. Thanks, I said stiffly. Tom shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I also wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. The way I handled the divorce, the things I did with your stuff, it was childish. I studied his face, looking for the manipulation I'd become so accustomed to, but he seemed genuinely remorseful. Why the change of heart? I asked. He sighed. Therapy, believe it or not. Karen insisted after she found out about some of the things I did. The jar thing especially. I raised an eyebrow. She made you get therapy over jar lids. When I explained it to my therapist, he said it was a control tactic, Tom admitted. I didn't see it that way at the time, but looking back, yeah, it was messed up. I'm working on it. Another part appreciated the apology, however late it came. I hope it helps, I said finally. The therapy. Tom nodded. Me too. He looked past me into the apartment. Place looks good. You seem happy. I am, I replied simply. After Tom left, I sat looking at my grandmother's ring. It felt like the final piece returning to me. The last thing Tom had held over me now, back where it belonged. That weekend, Mike and I went on our first official date dinner at a nice restaurant followed by a walk along the river downtown. It felt both new and familiar, exciting and comfortable at the same time. I have a confession to make, Mike said as we walked hand in hand. That first day when I helped you with the salsa jar, I think your husband is deliberately making jars too tight for you to open? It sounds crazy from the outside. I laughed. Yeah, I found that out the hard way. He squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, I never thought you were overreacting. Not even when you first explained about the divorce. Some things look small from the outside but feel enormous when you're living with them. Thank you for that, I said softly, for believing me when no one else did. 6 months later, I was completely settled into my new life. My rental agreement with Mike had evolved into us spending most nights together, though we still maintained separate spaces. My career was going well. I'd even gotten a promotion. My relationship with my family had healed. Mike surprised me with a picnic in the park where we'd had our second date. As we sat on the blanket enjoying the sunshine and good food, he handed me a small wrapped package. What's this? I asked. Just a little something to mark the occasion, he replied, looking slightly nervous. I unwrapped it to find a jar of my favorite fancy jam, the kind I only bought as a special treat. The lid was already loosened, just enough that I could open it easily. Look inside, Mike suggested. I opened the jar to find a small velvet box nestled on top of the jam. My breath caught as I lifted it out. This isn't a proposal, Mike said quickly. Not yet. I know you're still finding your footing. I opened the box. That all the jars in our house will always be tightened just right, secure enough to keep things fresh, but never so tight you can't open them yourself. Tears welled in my eyes as I slipped the ring onto my right hand. It's perfect, like you, I said, kissing him softly. Later that night, as we prepared dinner together in his kitchen, I watched Mike carefully close a jar of olives, tightening it just enough, then giving it a small quarter turn back to loosen it slightly. Such a small thing, but it meant everything. People still sometimes laugh when they hear the jar lid divorce story. My sister Emma likes to tell it at parties, though she now presents it as a cautionary tale about recognizing controlling behavior. Because in the end, it really wasn't about the jars. It was about being heard, being respected, being valued. And every day with Mike reminds me that I made the right choice, not just in leaving Tom, but in believing I deserved better. Sometimes the smallest things reveal the biggest truths about our relationships. For me, it was jar lids. For someone else, it might be something entirely different. But the lesson is the same. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time. I'm glad I finally did.